My name is Michael Sinatra, the director of the Centre de Recherche Interuniversitaire sur les Humanités Numériques basé à l'Université de Montréal. And it's my great pleasure to welcome our second plenary speaker for this 2025 colloquium in honor of Stéphane Sinclair, who left us 5 years ago, but is very much with us through many different ways. The series that we organize at the center every year, and all of his students and project, and sort of people being very much involved in the contribution that he made to our field. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Lauren Tilton today, who, after getting her degree from Yale in American Studies, went to the University of Richmond, where she is the E. Claiborne Robbins Professor of Liberal Arts and Digital Humanities in the Department of Rhetoric and Communication Studies. Her research, as most of you know, I'm sure, focuses primarily on analyzing, developing, and applying digital and computational methods to the study of 20th and 21st century documentary expression and visual culture. And as I told her, I had to write that down because she's got too many books. But I'll only mention, the one that most of you should be familiar with, Humanities Data in R, Exploring Networks, Geospatial Data, Images, and Text, that came out in 2015. Layered Life, Rhetoric and Representation in a 1,000 Life History Project, 2022 from Stanford. Distant Viewing, Computational Exploration of Digital Images in 2023. And most recently, it's the only person I know is Marcello who does that many publications, the volume Computational Humanities in the series Debates in Digital Humanities. Lauren is also the co-president of the Association for Computers in the Humanities, or ACH, as we usually all call it. And the best thing in her life right now is she is the president of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organization. And I'm not saying that because I was until this July. And I had the pleasure to work with Lauren when she was president-elect last year for a year. So that's quite wonderful. And other than that, if you want to know where to have a cocktail in any city, and I literally mean it, any city in the world, ask Lorraine. She has I took her to a bar. I thought nobody knew. She said, "Oh, it was on my note of places to go in Montreal." So there's no, don't ask me, ask her if you want to go out for a drink later on tonight. But without further ado, please welcome Lauren for her talk today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for the invitation to be here, and to everyone. It's a real honor to be a part of this event today and to talk about the legacies of Stéphane's work, particularly how it has framed a whole new generation of scholars and work that's coming out. And I also want to thank the entire staff of the Université de Montréal, everyone who makes these facilities possible, the catering, and the people who are part of making sure that these spaces look amazing and wonderful for us to engage in these wonderful conversations. So thank you to everybody. So today I'm going to talk about the methodological toolkit that Stéphane's scholarship has forged and that we continue to refine alongside his work. Along the way, I will trace how digital humanities has expanded to visual analysis, exploring the new tools and theories that have been crafted for these emerging practices, with particular attention to how Voyant has served as both foundational tool and blueprint for much of the subsequent work, as well as Musica and all of the amazing work that has been a part of these great collaborations, including their model of collaboration, which I think is one that has been really powerful. So I'm going to organize this around 3 tools that we're going to talk about today. We can have an epistemological question later about what is a tool. We're coming back full circle to this morning because that's something I've been thinking about. But I'm going to organize this talk around 3. The first 2 tools are longer than the third. So lest you're like we're a little bit of time in doing the first one, you're thinking they're evenly paced. Don't worry, we're not going to be here forever. And I'm probably breaking every rule of speak talks that our public speaking faculty teach. So don't tell them, okay, on my rhetoric department. The 3 tools I want to focus a bit today are on access, method, then method and theory, and then a last piece for us. So the first one is the tool access, how important that has been and foundational. And I think one of the first tools that has been left for us to work with, engaging with the work of Stéphane, is first the importance of access. Digital tools like Voyant are powerful tools for on-ramping, experimenting, and making accessible digital methods, which we've talked about today. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how we've gone from text to the visual in this move. So many of you are familiar, of course, with the long legacy of text analysis that has given these models for how we can build on the written word. The TEI was really foundational to this, as well as then tools that were built on top to then interpret those results and to think about those tags and the XML that was produced. Other elements along with this kind of close reading that were involved, and the really detailed part of doing that close reading of TEI. For those of you who have done it, it's quite a process. We also have seen other kinds of close reading that involved looking at annotations and really close reading of text in different ways, with a whole rise of annotation tools that shaped that. And as we started to think about expanding out, this is where Voyant obviously became so important, was that ability to zoom in and out, to close read and start distant reading at scale that allowed that, whether it was just at the level of the specific book or at the level of across books. And I think the other part that was really important contribution that shaped some work I'll get to as well is the way in which Voyant thought about the methodological toolkit that that scholars who were infused by literary analysis and others actually cared about. You could have picked a million things of text analysis. There was an entire methodological toolkit that's possible, but it was informed by deep commitments of humanities scholars to then shape the kinds of ways of knowing that were actually at stake and the kinds of ways in which we produce knowledge, and that was a sort of filtering of those methods that made that possible. So zooming out to the power of these methods, we have this larger ecosystem now that's produced entire generations of scholars thinking about large-scale text analysis and how can we see at distance, and to go from that close reading to distance reading and back and forth, getting into a series of tools. And we have a whole series of tools today that we saw even already that were really exciting, from Stylo, which is a very in the weeds, in the details, to the work of the Happy Trust to try to be able to zoom out at scale for that. But this ecosystem has been a big, the affordances of many of these tools have been a bit of a challenge for those of us, though, who work in visual culture. Because one of the challenges of working with visual and images is that the sits on kind of 4 different axes. One is the size of the data. So my area of specialty works with large, one area is working with television. We do analysis of sitcoms across decades. One episode of Bewitched or Friends is larger than all of Shakespeare, like 20 times. So the data scales really, really fast. It's also multimodal often. And the methodological tools for working with images are quite different than working with text. And I'll get to that kind of fundamental difference that a little bit. And our other challenge has been storage. It's just storing TXT files of literature, of text-based work is quite small, but the scaling of working with something like entire runs of sitcoms or TV, where we get into terabytes and terabytes of data, and then add the processing time on top of that. So visual analysis has had challenges of how do we do these kinds of methods that we're seeing across text, and how do we get there? And how could we build on these kind of ecosystem of digital tools that were so powerful and laid out? And so to look at some early examples of this work, we have a history of tools like Cinemetrics. So this is from the Chicago and team from the 80s, 90s, basically. And they started to think about how can we start to think about the elements of film and television, that particularly film, that matter to people who care a lot about how to read or view film. So one of the big things that they started to get into what is called average shot length, which is a proxy for the pacing of a show or a film. You can think of when you're watching certain movies, you feel the speed of it through the shots. And some films have long shots that guide you through. And there's also framed with different types of camera movements and others. But the first way to just get it, that was to try to do average shot length. How long is each shot? And so they did this manually, watching films in stop, shot, time, tedious work. But this is a kind of real close viewing that had been sort of central to a lot of this earlier TV work, earlier film work, working with visual analysis. Another element that has been key to the sort of work that's come out of the visual side has been these sort of annotation tools as well. So annotation, like you saw earlier, became really key, but it's a different kind of annotation than we see in text. It's an annotation that's steeped in the sort of semantics or the grammars of film and TV, which are not the same as the film and grammars of language. And people trying to often take tools that already existed for other purposes and adjust them slightly for those needs. So you had tools like VN, Ligne Notant, which was a big one, as well as tools like Media Thread and others to do that kind of close reading. It's no surprise that film scholars particularly picked this up as an issue of interest, and that as a way to facilitate really close looking of particular films, and often by auteur. So that kind of began to zoom out a bit as folks started to become really more interested in how we could zoom out. And that's where we kind of got the rise of sort of that sort of close viewing and a sort of proxy of starting to zoom out in the same way we saw with distant reading. And this was really one of the things that made a huge difference and enabled this was a serious development in technology, which was the computational feasibility of neural networks. Neural networks have been theorized pretty much, I think, since the 60s, basically, as a math. They're not new, but the computational possibilities of them was really not an affordance until the early, about 2010, as we get the rise of the literal computing power to do this, and the idea that you just churn over the layers over and over and over again, and that will provide insights. So that ability, though, to do that with CNNs offered a possibility to start to do this large-scale analysis that moved us past the sort of initial work, which was led by Lev Manovich, which was just color analysis, literally counting colors of the pixels, with his tool called that he built off of a biology tool, an image plot, which is a science tool. He built it off of that. That we can move to actually looking at the image itself and beyond just counting pixels, but to the much more neural nets opened up that possibility. And I will note about cultural analytics, which I think is an interesting genealogy for those who are interested in this. It's been used much more broadly, but actually Lev Manovich is a new media plus computer science scholar. He's talking just about born digital images. His theory of cultural analytics is not text. It's not DVDs and films digitized. It is a new media argument about the ways in which born digital should be analyzed and to deal with the scale of the format itself. So it's interesting how that particular idea kind of took a life of its own in the DH community. So a lot of these pieces led to what was called the call for a visual turn in DH. These are probably many names that folks recognize, Key and Campo, see in the past, work. A lot of this came around 2015, 16, 17 in there, and a sort of rise of special issues to start to think about what kinds of tools and elements were possible for zooming out on images and to actually take the image itself as the site of analysis, not writing about images, not producing other forms about the image, but the image actually being analyzed that neural nets provided. And that was really foundational to our original work, which is when we started to create the distant viewing toolkit. Seeing the real interest in the sort of large scale analysis of text that something like Voyant was really made possible, we became interested in if we could develop a toolkit to do large scale analysis that made image analysis possible. And it was fun, but really challenging. Here's an example. This is old imagery of us doing this. And we sort of guided it around for several principles. One was that who was our audience? And this is where I think tools like Voyant have been really successful. is it had a really specific audience, has a relatively specific audience in mind. Our audience was film and media and visual culture scholars. That is the audience for this tool. It's not for everybody. General philosophy is that tools that are built for everybody work for nobody. Yeah, okay, so good crowd for this. Okay. It was specific. So we actually built custom algorithms we built for how to do shot boundary detection, scene segmentation, and other elements that are animated the kinds of methods and ideas that animate film and TV scholarship. The grammar of film is we made custom algorithms that did that grammar of film. We also we went through the model zoos. So one of the challenges that's a little bit different with text analysis is because so much of this work is neural net based. When you go into a model zoo, it's like, do you want the 10,000 parameter? Do you want the 20,000 parameter? Do you want to train slightly on this data set or that data set or this and that and that? And there's a million decisions for everything from object detection to color segmentation to image segmentation. It doesn't have this, it has a variance in the models that text often you can bypass and actually avoid. And so we actually went through the model zoos, which is a hilarious name, by the way. Someone's got to write about that. You go to Hugging Face and you go into a model zoo. Yeah, right? Who made this stuff? You go deep learning. I mean, come on. Anyway, with my big data, I mean, it's an endless, we all know who wrote this stuff. Anyway, so we have this entire, we went through and vetted through that to try to and tested out tons of models to see what was working best on certain kinds of TV and film, so that the person who was trying to try this out didn't, when they went on this thing and there were 50,000 options, they were like, where do I start? So we're trying to lower that barrier. And we wrapped it into just a few lines of code. And that's where we started with this. This was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we're deeply grateful for the opportunities that they've built for us there. I'll just zoom this up for a second. We tried to make it just very easy lines of code, just call DVT/call annotate. Annotate will give you an annotation of the scenes. Call scene gives you a scene. If we tried to, we would give you just by 2 lines, 1 little line of code, 1 function, basically, it gave you what you needed to play with. And then it produced everything open access, open source on your computer. We don't take anything. And we also built into this initial version, trying to think about this power of visualization that I think has been so important and for tools like Voyant, is how do we begin to visualize this data at scale? So this was our first attempt at just trying to show people under the hood of what these algorithms were doing. What's happening under here? What kind of decision making is it going to make? Because when you just get a JSON file of bounding boxes for each shot and each scene and each cut, it's like it's illegible without some sort of visualization. And so we tried to start to be able to do that for folks. But the challenge with this is one in which I know I think is part of the power of what we have now, are these on-ramp tools, these tools that actually, because even with a little, what I would say was a pretty minimal coding, was really still too big of a leap for many folks who were trying to figure out how to do this kind of work, and which I totally get. I think also we have to think about who's comfortable coding, and we have a long legacy of history of gendered and racialized ideas about who codes and who doesn't, and who feels comfortable and who doesn't. And so these tools become a way to, I think, break down those barriers of inequality that also have shaped who actually sees themselves as able to be a programmer or a coder. And that becomes a really part of the equity and access and community building that is key, that I didn't really quite understand, I think have come to really appreciate more about these tools that give people access. And so what we did was we now have launched the Distant Viewing Toolkit. And this is a toolkit where anyone can go in and try out these new algorithms and load your own data to make it plug and play. So using some brand new technologies of JavaScript that allows you to run models from Hugging Face in browser. This all runs in your browser. We never take your data. You never touch any of your materials. One can now load and play around and see how these algorithms are working and what kinds of image analysis might work for their data. You can upload your own video files and short snippets. So to think about well, if I start here, does face detection do something for me that's interesting? Okay, now if I want to scale up, I have to go use Python. But that's the same with something like Voyant. If you want to scale up, you've got to move it out of the system and move on. But that's the ramp. That's a really important part of the ramp. And I want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Mellon Foundation for funding for this project. And I'll note that we also just received $1 million from Mellon to do workshops and funding around the world to bring people and pay for them to come do workshops with us at Richmond. So look out for that call. It's fully paid for to lower access, to provide access to everybody. So the last piece I'll show then is we have these little pieces. And we can do zero-shot models and all. And then what we did was right next to it, you see that Python, learn more, and then Python right below. Once you're in the method, you can now go straight to the Python code, and we give you the exact same Python code to run everything you have here. And we have Google Colab notebooks. So we were talking about notebook cultures earlier. We have notebooks that are all set up to run through all of this. So we built the pipeline from explore to code notebook to custom coding yourself in the terminal to go the whole, try to build the ramp up for these technologies and to give access of that ramp. And I'll note that we join colleagues who've been thinking about this. We saw PixPlot yesterday. Someone's worked with you. Who had visualized PixPlot in their talk yesterday? Someone did. I'll remember. Anyway, and then we've gotten great tools like Collection Space Navigator. These are just embedding spaces. So they're a little different, but we're starting to see this world of tools and visualization tools emerging right now. And I would say that this is a really exciting space. It's really like opened up in a way that as the technologies have shifted, it's made it really possible. And we're seeing some more work coming out in this way. So we're seeing this tool, the Beyond the Colors tool that has been prominent from the team in Zurich. They're turning that into a more color of films. And I think actually a project I'm super excited about is MIME, coming from Stanford. They're taking recordings of theater and doing gesture analysis at scale to understand how gesture works in theater, a different grammar of visuality. And this is Michael Rao and Peter Broadwell at Stanford. And this is incredibly exciting. They're making a generalized tool for this. So I think we're just getting started. The possibilities here are just really opening up as we think about these on-ramps in. And so I think that comes back to what we've said before. Voyant is a dialogue. They said it was a dialogue to think with, and building software as an intellectual contribution form of research theory and method combined, right? So we see these really important ways that they're thinking with us, we're growing with them, and we can actually start to bring theory and method combined, which I'm going to get to in a second. And I'll just note that distant viewing is a method as well. And so it's actually theorized as a method. Which I'll come to in a second now about the role of theory and method together. So I'll turn to the next tool, which is not just about access and on-ramping, but the interconnection. I think another tool we got left from this wonderful work on Voyant and hermeneutica and so many other was just the importance of method and theory connected. So I would say that DH is often at its best when method and theory are intertwined and articulated, when we can really put those pieces together. And so we've had some theories like that, right? We've had distant reading, we've got the idea of hermeneutica that have been really key. And then also ideas like macro analysis. That one didn't take off as much, but it was still an attempt by jockers to theorize, right? And even if we don't always take those theories with us, I think just even the work to try to get there is an exciting move for the field, because it helps us do the kind of entanglement of knowledge that we've been thinking about. So this part of that is it says that so we became interesting about how do we put theory and method together, and how do we cross the divide between writing code and interpreting images as opposed to text. How do we do that? And that's where the idea of actually distant viewing itself came up. So one of that whole toolkit I showed you and the method that we developed is actually really theoretically informed. It's actually an implementation of a theory. And the theory, we call it distant viewing. So what do we mean by that? So we argue that distant viewing is a theory of how the ways in which images make meaning, and what kind of work, how is computer vision making that work? And so we argue that the mimetic nature of images necessitates that the computational analysis of digital images starts with the extraction of semantic metadata using computer vision. In other words, the ways in which they make meaning, you cannot actually wait to do any analysis. You have to make meaning of the pixels. So if I have a concept like milk, and you have MILK, you have a series of agreed upon code systems for how to represent that word in certain linguistic contexts. If I want to represent milk, there's an endless number of pixel combinations to represent the same idea. I cannot defer the code system, the development of another code system inside of it, which is different than text, how text works, how text is formed, and how text analysis happens. And that makes one reason why visual analysis is can be so much challenging compared to text sometimes, because you have to build a custom code, you have to build a code system, right, through annotation. You can't defer that process. So we call that that construction of annotations, that decisions that we are making to say what those pixels mean, we call that a process of annotating, and that this is a mediated form of viewing. But because you cannot defer every computer vision algorithm, and these are all built into LLMs, by the way, you have to make a decision at the moment it starts reading those pixels. It cannot defer meaning making at all. It cannot be agnostic. And so that condition of its mediation changes its relationship to the ways in which it makes meaning relative to other forms. And so that's why we call it viewing, because that's viewing. It's not seeing. You can't just passively see. It's not looking. It's literally viewing in the same way. And this draws on the work of like Lisa Cartwright and others in visual culture scholarship who have theorized the difference between seeing, looking, and viewing. And so therefore, computer vision is not a neutral process. It's a mediated way of seeing and viewing that is encoded semiotically and encoded technically. Is literally a media infrastructures problem. It's a semiotic challenge. And it's an encoding decoding problem. The ways in which images make meaning is not the same in which like text makes meaning. So you have three different epistemological differences that shift it. And those have made the technical challenges of building the tools, the technical challenges of not just calling it distant reading, it has a different hermeneutics, basically. And so when we say is that when we are using and designing computer vision, we are engaging in the act of distant viewing. Or if you're using LLMs, we're engaging in the act of distant viewing because they are actually a computer vision machine tucked inside of it, the neural nets tucked inside of it, the transformers. And it's actually obscuring the computer vision part of it even more so in the way that the models are built. So their multimodality is obscuring the semiotic differences and the meaning-making differences by compressing them inside the model of LLMs. And so if you want to know more about that, Distant Viewing is the book. It's open access, all the codes with it to unpack more of that theory, but I will keep going for that. So, so distant viewing, we then say is the toolkit and everything is a part of putting all those theory and method together. And I'll show you one other layer in which theory is working. It's not just that distant viewing is a theory of how images make, how computer vision and computational analysis has these different epistemological and knowledge models that are based on what it creates. It actually enables us to then take our theories from film and television and others and use them to model in the analysis itself. So we do things such as take models such as ground and sky and use it as a proxy for film for perspective, whether someone is looking up or down on someone. So we can now use the model to map it onto our theories of visuality, our theories of foreground, background, a rule of thirds, what are other ideas of angle, ideas of focus. And we can then encode them by creating different models that look in those ways that have animated how we study visual culture. And so those are the kinds of tools and things we're starting to build to think about how we infuse the theories of film and television studies into the computer vision algorithms that we're designing. So this is one in which you can do the analysis of looking up. You can map this onto concepts like group shot. This is our Bewitched one, which is fun. We looked at who was on screen when and what kind of shot did they do the close up on them, which is like a sign of intimacy, or a long shot. And we tracked them across all of Bewitched, to look at how different characters were on screen and perceived, and who got to be on screen and who didn't, across Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, and compared them about the way that power, feminism, and identity were produced in post-war America amid the Cold War and the space race. And so those are the kinds of things too, where we're wrapping it into this sort of thinking with, colluding, and combining. And I'll say that one of the things that's really important to all of this, again, you can go to the DV Lab if you want, is that everything is open source. Everything is open access. You can, all the code in the book is available, and it comes in many, many forms to build that on-ramp of theory and method to combine. It's an ecosystem of knowledge, an ecosystem of elements. So as I said, that was tool 2. DH is often its best when method and theory are intertwined and articulated. So my last one, I want to wait till the really last end of our conversation, if that's okay. So maybe I could pause for a minute. We could talk or have questions for a bit, and then I'll take the last like 3 minutes to do one thing at the end for tool 3. Does that sound good? Okay. Part 3, last piece. Okay. So the last piece here is the last tool I think that we've been left with, and I think has resonated the entire time, has been about the generosity of community and care for it. So these pieces of access and generosity, methods and theory, being really foundational at DH. And I think, as we've heard about the legacy of Stefan, that has been really been central to that. I don't know about, for many of us, I think digital humanities was the one place we felt safe in the academy. It was the one place where ideas that were outside the box were possible. And it was the one place where senior scholars and mentors actually cared about people and took care of them. And I think that it's all too rare. And it's models, and it's the work of our colleagues like Stefan, Jeffrey, and so many in this room that have made that possible, because it modeled a different way for institutions and power and generosity to work. And so I think the last tool is one of thank you. When I started the Executive Council of ACH in 2018, the work of Stefan's leadership and kindness resonated. There were so many stories about that. And I had actually meant to write and say thank you for Voyant and thank you for all this work. And I never did that, which was a mistake. So I hope today, well, for the last gesture for the day, is to model something I wish I had done and what was modeled by him and so many of our colleagues, which is I have postcards, and I'm inviting you to write a letter of thank you to someone you care about and to send it. And I have stamps for it as well. And so for the course of the day or tomorrow, to just say thank you to someone, because we don't do it. So we don't do it often enough. So thank you.
Thank you.